this is what we were talking about earlier, that if society doesn't in some way move to a little bit to the left, it's going to make it even harder for left-wing forces, yet alone someone to the left of Bernie Sanders. I mean, Bernie Sanders was seen as a radical, right? I mean, as society keeps dragging further and further to the right, that's going to make the possibility of fascism greater, not the possibility of like some kind of left-wing revolution.
Yeah.
But also just voting for Joe Biden and apologizing for the Democratic Party at every opportunity also continues that right-wing trajectory. So the point of this, I think the point is to move society as a whole to the left. And of course, the Republicans aren't doing that. Tucker Carlson's not doing that. And Joe Biden's not doing that either.
I recently, debated this with Shama Sawant, Seattle City Councilwoman, and from Socialist Alternative. And I respect her point of view so much. And she asked me, what's the litmus test then for supporting a candidate? She says Bernie was the floor. Socialist Alternative supported Bernie, but that was the floor. And I can't get behind someone like RFK Jr. or Marianne Williamson, who I feel like doesn't have the same bona fides or the same, policy platform that I support or any, whatever it is. And as I'm thinking about this now and talking to you, I think my litmus test in terms of what value I think can be extracted from the electoral process is candidates that unflinchingly expose the failures of the Democratic Party and the contrast that a genuine left candidate could present. And so I think that is partly why in this moment there is so much energy behind RFK Jr. and why I find myself very intrigued by what he's doing, because of the kind of ferocity of his statements critical of the intelligence agencies, juxtaposed with Marjorie Taylor Greene, who I asked about defunding the FBI when she was on Rising, and you can guess what her answer was. I said, well, have you drafted anything? Are you proposing any legislation to actually do this? Have you reached out to anybody on the left to help draft something who shares your interest in this, given that 85% of COINTELPRO's activities were targeting leftists? And predictably, no, she has not, of course, done anything. But like, that's a hole, right? Like, that's an opening that an actual leftist could be filling. And who's gonna draw those contrasts? Well, maybe RFK Jr. Maybe RFK Jr. will promulgate some legislation that it could actually have actually do something, about the intelligence agency overreach, and two, completely explode the right's ability to present themselves as populists, because you have a real example of someone who's actually acting on the rhetoric. And, maybe I can completely acknowledge the ways in which these candidates are not Bernie. But to me, them being less than Bernie from a policy perspective or a messaging perspective or a do I trust them because they've been around so long saying the same thing perspective is, are they consistently saying the Democratic Party is a failure? The Democratic Party is not working in your interest. The Democratic Party is corrupt. Biden is corrupt. And if they land that, and I think that Marianne has gotten some criticism in part because she said some things that were not arguably, in my view, too soft on Democrats. And JFK Jr. recently said something about liking Joe Biden, which I also very much am not a fan of. I don't know why anyone has to say that. To me, saying you like Joe Biden, it's like the people who want to go on and on about how well the Nazi suit fit. Like, I'm sorry about Goodwin's Law. Like, I'll do it too. Like, who cares? Like, who cares? There are other tailors. And I don't see the point of it. Not that Joe Biden is a Nazi. Disclaimer. But you know what I mean? Like, to me, I think that's my litmus test. And as long as someone is doing the work that I think is so important of creating the contrast, exposing the hypocrisy of the Democratic Party, I'll support them. I'll at the very least vote for you in a Democratic primary. I don't know. Have you given that much thought?
Yeah, I mean, I still think it's too early to see how the RFK Jr. campaign will go. I mean, we all know that this is very early in the campaign process, and sometimes a candidate who's polling well at the beginning will just disappear, or sometimes a candidate will grow in influence. I don't know. I just think that the media attacks he's going to be facing they're going to be terminal. I mean, like, he cannot survive the media attacks he's going to face. I mean, Bernie had basically nothing against him. He was like, oh, look at Jeremy Corbyn. These are like cuddly old guys who basically like spent their entire lives as civil rights activists and union organizers, and look at like they were portrayed as Hitlerian anti-Semites in the case of Jeremy Corbyn, or like a racist who like for some reason like Bernie Sanders was like a racist misogynist despite getting arrested for protesting in support of civil rights. Anyway, whatever. I mean, just imagine what they're going to have against RFK Jr.
Well, so far they seem to be leaning so hard into the autism vaccine stuff. Fair enough. And the your family isn't even here, which is a really weird line of attack. Your family doesn't even support you. Your family, they bring it up every time they talk about it. And I'm like, who
I wonder
cares?
why. They're 6 feet under.
Like, I mean, well, that part. Well, I saw Kennedy respond once like, well, or maybe it wasn't Kennedy, but somebody was like, the ones whose opinions we really care about aren't around.
Now, I'm just curious, if you are not able to get your own sisters to vote for you for president, how would you make that appeal to American voters?
What is your family like? Do they agree with everything that you say and do?
They'd probably vote for me if I ran for president.
Yeah, well, I have siblings who will vote for me as well, but I have a big family, and many of them will not.
What's remarkable is a good part of that 14% isn't coming from your family. Many of them are not keen on you taking on the president. And I'm just wondering why that is. Now, I know 3 of them are diplomats in the Biden administration, so that makes sense. Others, though, they're holding back. Why is that?
Well, I don't agree with my family on all issues.
But it's such a weird, I mean, I can't imagine doing something in my life and somebody harping on the idea that like my brother wasn't in attendance. Like, who cares? He's kind of a neo-lib. I love you though, Brandon. Like, it's like, so I don't know. So but part of me thinks that they're over relying on that so much that they might not be digging deeper, at least at this stage, and they might be overestimating how much the public cares about either of those things.
Well, I mean, they always do. I mean, as well as I, how out of touch most mainstream media reporters are. I mean, like, they really don't understand. Like, first of all, a recent poll found that 50% or 49% of people in the U.S. identify as independents, 25% as Republicans, 25% as Democrats. So if you identify with a party, you are quite literally representing a political minority in the country, right. 1/4 of the population. And of course, RFK Jr. is someone who absolutely would appeal to those kind of the half of the population that identifies as an independent, which is often ideologically confused, but tends to support more economically progressive policies, and maybe on some cultural policies may have like some more reactionary views or whatever. But the point is that, like, yeah, I mean, if he can like get some ideologically confused people who are on the fence and move them a little bit toward the left, that's a positive role. And if he can point out that the Democratic Party is corrupt and neoliberal and supports war, that's good. But again, at the end of the day, I mean, what is he going to be is he actually going to be able to change anything in the Democratic Party? Because, I mentioned earlier this discourse about like the Overton window and everything, but like the Democratic Party is just, again, like I said, it has infinite the ability to just suck anyone outside of it into it, like this infinite gravity. It's a black hole, and it's like when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object, like what's going to happen there? Like, I just don't see. If Bernie couldn't do it, he was, again, not to be pessimistic, he was the best chance we had in so many decades. If he couldn't do it with all he had going for him, I don't see how someone, even with the last name Kennedy, could pull it off. So the question is, what should the goal of the campaign be? If it can move people to the left and get them to criticize intelligence agencies, the CIA, the FBI, criticize war, and help associate that again with left-wing politics, unlike Tucker, I mean, he's going to play a positive role. But it's really too early to tell at this point.
And it's worth saying, his policy platform based on his website is still relatively thin. It's not clear whether he supports kind of the basic Bernie Medicare for all, his labor platform, living wage, all of those kinds of things. But Marianne's is very well developed. So there are candidates kind of for different reasons that are carrying the mantle of a political agenda that no Democrat is really talking about at this point, which I see as a benefit. But I don't want to give the fact that Marianne does have all these developed policies on our platform, on our website at least, short shrift. I do, before we wrap, I know we've been going on forever. I'm so sorry, and I appreciate your time today, Ben. I wanted you to finish the point that you were about to make about Tucker Carlson and as a quote unquote anti-war voice, given how hawkish he has been about China.
Yeah, I mean, just because a person criticizes one war doesn't make them anti-war. In fact, if that person criticizes one war in order to argue in support of another war, they're objectively pro-war. And that's what Tucker Carlson does all the time. I have spent a lot of time looking through his discussions of the war in Ukraine and his discussions in general of Russia. And usually he uses the same argument. He says, Russia is not our enemy, China is our enemy. That's not an anti-war argument. That's a pro-war argument. He's saying that we're waging war on the wrong target.
The biggest threat to this country is not Vladimir Putin. That's ludicrous. The biggest threat, obviously, is China. China spies on us more than any other country. It is behind the massive OPM hack carried out from 2012 through 2014. It has, of course, the world's largest population. It will soon have the world's largest economy. Its military is growing rapidly in strength. It even manufactures most of the fentanyl that is killing tens of thousands of Americans every year. Americans assume that this country is on top and will be forever, but could we find ourselves overtaken before we know it, imminently even? Michael Pillsbury is the director for the Center for Chinese Strategy at the Hudson Institute and one of the world's great experts on this exact subject. He's the author of the 100-Year Marathon, China's Secret Strategy to Replace America as the Global Superpower. He joins us tonight. Mr. Pillsbury, thanks for coming on.
He constantly says that. I mean, I've tweeted out multiple videos in which he literally says, this is an exact quote, Russia is not our enemy. China is our greatest threat. So, and then he brings on neoconservatives all the time, including people from, hawkish neocon think tanks in Washington, D.C., Marco Rubio. I mean, these same people, he'll sometimes criticize neocons for supporting the war in Ukraine, but then he'll bring on those same neocons to talk about how evil China is. And then people will say, okay, well, Tucker really hates China. We give you that. He portrays China as like the evil boogeyman who's spying on you. It's cheese under your bed. He claimed that China is murdering. He used the word murder. He claimed China is murdering tens of thousands of Americans through fentanyl, as if China is personally responsible for putting needles in people's arms and killing them, right? So, I mean, that if you believe truly that a foreign country is murdering tens of thousands of your countrymen, that is basically saying that you should wage war on them and kill tens of thousands of their countrymen, right? But then there are people who say, okay, well, Tucker hasn't openly called for war with China, but this is the same argument people made when they said, okay, well, I don't support war in Iraq, but Saddam Hussein is this evil boogeyman who likes to eat children for fun, and he has weapons of mass destruction, and, we have to impose sanctions on him, and everything he does is evil, and he's just a cartoon villain, but I don't support the U.S. military invading. Well, I mean, you're taking the football to like the 99-yard line. I mean, like you're taking it all the way and you're doing the work at a moment when there's complete war fever in Washington. Russia's not, who agrees with Tucker Carlson? The vast majority of the political class in Washington. If you read, as I do frequently, the white papers coming from the Pentagon and from the State Department, and from NATO, I've been reading all their reports. They all say Russia is only a short-term threat. China is the long-term threat. NATO just released their strategic blueprint and their strategic concept, which is their blueprint. And they say Russia is a short-term threat. China is the long-term threat. The Pentagon just released its national defense strategy. They said the same thing. Russia is a short-term threat. China is the long-term threat. So Tucker is quite literally helping the Pentagon, the State Department, and NATO, whom he'll sometimes criticize on his program. He's helping them manufacture consent for war on China. And if you look at the rhetoric about China, I mean, it is even crazier than the rhetoric about Iraq in 2002 and 2003. And if you, in 2002 and 2003, engage in that kind of rhetoric, but you claimed you opposed the invasion, it doesn't matter because you helped justify the invasion. And that's the real danger right now. I mean, we hear more and more talk of a war, of a conventional military war with China, a nuclear armed power with 1.4 billion people over Taiwan. And I mean, so if you're helping to manufacture consent for that, it doesn't matter that you say, well, okay, well, I oppose the war in Ukraine, because you're the only way that you say that you oppose that war is justifying a new war.
Yeah. I mean, you've really done some great tweets on this. I encourage everybody to go and follow and look. Branko Marcetic just also published a great article in Jacobin detailing a lot of the specific quotes from Carlson's show over the years. As you said, saying, you know, China is our, quote, main enemy, saying China is the preeminent threat to the United States because it's impossible to engage meaningfully simultaneously in Europe and Asia, like pick a lane, basically, exactly what you said. I just wanted to ask you about the posture that he took when Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan.
So Nancy Pelosi goes to Taipei. What's the effect of that? Well, we don't need to guess. The Chinese government has said repeatedly and clearly that if Nancy Pelosi lands in Taiwan, it could trigger a global war. A representative of Chinese state media said this, quote, if U.S. fighter jets escort Pelosi's plane into Taiwan, it is an invasion. The Chinese army has the right to forcibly dispel Pelosi's plane and the U.S. fighter jets, including firing warning shots and making tactical movement of obstruction. If ineffective, then shoot them down. Oh, shoot them down. Okay. So the White House naturally was asked about this. We're suddenly on the brink of yet another global war, potentially a nuclear war, because Nancy Pelosi has been given the green light by the White House to fly to Taiwan.
It seemed like there was like a weird kind of coverage that said this is dangerous. It's an escalation. Did you see that rhetoric as counter to this idea that he's trying to escalate with China, or is it something else? Because I think Branko framed it as he was saying now is not the time to engage with China, like not yet. Her timing is off, as opposed to how it was framed as kind of a war with China is a bad idea, that Tucker was anti-war with China in that instance.
Nancy Pelosi's stunt was extremely dangerous and provocative. I mean, it shows that both parties are really just pushing for war with China. Again, it's so dangerous. The Financial Times, which is, you know, one of the leading mainstream newspapers, just published an article by a British journalist who went to Washington, and he wrote he was shocked at just how hawkish everyone he spoke to from both parties in Washington was in regard to China. He said everyone he spoke to basically was of the view, Republican and Democrat, that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when there's war with China. And when Nancy Pelosi went to Taiwan, I mean, she was basically just shoving, not only like poking like the ribs of China, like shoving like a knife in the ribs of China, saying that we are violating the very basic fundamentals that our diplomatic relations are based on. So very brief history here. In 1949, there was the Communist Revolution. China overthrew this partially feudal, partially colonial regime. After 100 years of the century of humiliation in which Western powers carved up parts of China, in 1900, for instance, there were 8 Western powers plus Japan that invaded China and occupied Beijing. And the U.S. military, by the way, was involved in the occupation of Beijing in 1900. And the U.S. military just did war exercises, war games about Taiwan. And in the background, the U.S. military, the troops had a photo of the U.S. military occupation of Beijing in 1900. So very provocative symbol. But in terms of Taiwan, so from 1949 until 1972, the U.S. did not formally recognize the People's Republic of China as a legitimate government. In 1949, the nationalists, who were the very far-right fascistic forces that lost the Chinese Civil War against the communists, they were pushed out of the mainland and went to Taiwan. And they formed what they called the Republic of China. And the U.S. government continued recognizing them as the legitimate government of all of China, despite being a small percentage of the population, until 1972. And in the 1950s, the U.S. military established a military base on Taiwan, the island, and they stored nuclear weapons on Taiwan that were aimed at mainland China. So that was always a sword of Damocles hanging over China. In the 1950s, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the commanders of the U.S. military, wanted to nuke mainland China in the Taiwan Strait crisis. And fortunately, I'm not one to praise Eisenhower, but Eisenhower said no, because if we start a nuclear war with China, it's going to start a nuclear war with the Soviet Union, and we're all going to die. So, because at that time, China was a close ally of the Soviet Union. So anyway, fast forwarding, In 1972, Richard Nixon went to China famously. No one expected it, and normalized relations with China. However, if you read the Shanghai Communique, which you can easily find online, it's not long, the diplomatic statement that Nixon signed to normalize relations with China, one of the main points that the U.S. government agreed to, the fundamental on which formal diplomatic relations is based, is that the United States recognizes that Taiwan is part of China. There is one China. It is called the One China policy. And for China, this is like Ukraine for Russia, but even worse, because Russia doesn't claim that Ukraine is part of it, but in the sense that this is an existential problem for national security, because if Ukraine, which has a 2,000-kilometer border, stores nuclear weapons aimed at Russia, I mean, it cannot protect itself. If nuclear weapons are on Taiwan, I mean, that's an existential problem for China. Imagine in northern Mexico, there was a coup in northern Mexico organized by the U.S., and then there was an anti-U.S. government installed, and they stored Chinese nuclear weapons on the border of the U.S. That's what we're talking about with Ukraine or Taiwan, right? In the case of Taiwan, it's even worse because the U.S. technically recognizes, according to a UN Security Council resolution, which is international law, that there is one China and Taiwan is part of China. So when Nancy Pelosi when she went as the Speaker of the House, which makes her second in the chain of command for the president. After the vice president, she would be the third person. So a high-level U.S. government official from the ruling party, she visited Taiwan and did not go to the mainland. So what the U.S. is essentially saying with that message is that they recognize Taiwan as a separate country, which violates the very foundation that U.S.-Chinese relations are based on. So this is basically the U.S. saying that they don't recognize China as either a sovereign state or they recognize Taiwan as a separate state. And the U.S. just sent 200 troops to Taiwan. The U.S. is sending billions of dollars of weapons to Taiwan. This is like Ukraine Part 2, but even more dangerous. So everything that the U.S. did with NATO expansion right up into Russia's borders, they're now repeating it, but at an even more dangerous level in Taiwan. And unfortunately, it's both parties.
Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.